Welcome back. We are working now with Senior English B, and more particularly now to finish with our observations on the poetry of W.B. Yeats. We are spending our time now with Sailing to Byzantium. We'll go back now in your notes. Let's get ready to go to work now. Annotations in front of you. I want to work now part by part. Notice that you have a very uniform poem. I'm making an observation at 2B, aren't I? Notice each part contains how many lines? Did you see this? Watch this. Notice each part contains how many lines, and notice each part has a certain kind of rhyme scheme. Do you see it? Line 1, young. Line 3, song. Line 2, trees. Line 4, seas. A, B, A, B, but then we come back with, again, long and dies, A, B again, but then the final two of the 8 lines will rhyme alone, what we call a rhymed couplet. Notice neglect and intellect rhyme. Do you see it? Do you see the rhyme scheme game happening here, right? Notice the internal rhythm. I'm still working at 2B, aren't I? So notice, I can say, that is no country for old men, or I can slow it down. That is no country for old men. The young in one another's arms. Do you see it? Ba-bum, 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 ba-bum. That game's going to get played as well all the way through the poem. So let's make an observation for your notes at 2B. Yeats is trying to say something about his culture of roughly the 1920s. But at the same time, he's going to play the game at 2B of having all kinds of poetic things happening as well. So this is symphonic. Do you understand what I mean when I use that word? Symphonic. In other words, he not only has a message, but he's also playing all kinds of poetic games here as well. He's got a poem, he's divided into 4 parts. So we want to ask about each one of these parts. What is it that he says about this world that he's living in? What is it that he says about the world to come? Now, we'll begin in part 1. That is no country for old men. Really? What is it a country for? The young. Notice the young, think beer commercial here. The young in one another's arms. Birds in the trees singing those dying generations at their song. Then, there's this bit that some of you tried to memorize this poem, and so it's a little bit confusing. What's going on with this next thing? The salmon falls, the mackerel crowded seas, fish, flesh, or fowl, commend all summer long, whatever is, are you ready for the Lion King moment at 3A? Whatever is begotten, born, and dies. What do we call it in Disney's Lion King? The great what? That's how you were raised, right? You were taught the same concept. Notice it for your notes. I told you, everything for Yeats is about cycles. Your life is a cycle. You are begotten. 2 people had to hook up and exchange fluids. That's the only way you got here. Born. That's the next thing. But then inevitably your death is coming. Now you're young, and so it's hard for you to imagine that this is no country for old men. Why? Because you're young, right? It doesn't occur to you that there will be a time, if you live long enough, when, you're not young anymore. That's just coming, right? You can make fun of old people all you want to, and the way they drive and the rest of it. It never seems to happen. If you don't believe me, just go home and look at your 3rd grade elementary school picture, right? Just look at your 6th grade middle school picture. Or, if you really want to blow your mind, just go back in the annual and look 4 years ago at your 9th grade school picture. That was you 4 years ago. And you can already begin to see how physically you're getting older. What will you look like in 4 years from now? See how that works? Of course, we realize 4 years from now, you're halfway to 40. Right? You've already made it halfway to 40 in 4 years. Right? Which tells you you are getting older. Notice all of the animals mentioned in part 1. This is something else you might want to write down. All the animals mentioned. Notice he mentions birds. He mentions beautiful salmon. He mentions mackerel. These are, of course, fish. Notice he mentions the fish, flesh, or fowl, commend all summer long, whatever is begotten, born, and dies. In other words, it doesn't matter whether you're a human or whether you are some other kind of animal species, all of us share the same fate. We all are born and we all die. However, notice, caught in that sensual music, all neglect monuments of unaging intellect. Now, this is an interesting line, Mr. Brown, and it's led to a lot of debate in room 303. First of all, I want to go back. Do you remember this model that I gave to you a while ago? We worked with a number of poems using this model. Remember, it was this two-box model. Do you remember this, Mr. Durant? Above the first, we can talk about issues that are formed. Above the other, form less. I'm changing the language, by the way, Mr. Nelson, a little bit. Here above this one, we also put concepts. We put ideas. Above this one, we can put the word physical. Above this one, we put metaphysical, beyond the physical. Remember, we mentioned, Mr. Judice, that we talked about a beautiful body. Remember this one? We can talk about a beautiful body, a Victoria's Secret model or a Brad Pitt. But then there's this thing, this concept that we call, remember, beauty, right? And somehow you can touch a beautiful body, I suppose, if you're fortunate enough. That's one thing you can touch, taste. We won't get into the rest of it, right, Mr. Harder? But there is a very difficult thing, touching beauty. It's very hard to touch beauty. You can do this with a beautiful body, but can you do this with beauty? Well, no, it doesn't quite work the same way. Beauty is a concept. Beauty is something that is metaphysical, beyond the physical. We made the observation that you can play this game over and over again, pointing out that everything in this box of or related to what? The five senses. Ruthie's tree, for example, you can see, touch, taste. We won't get into the rest of it out in the courtyard. But then there's this thing called nature with a capital N. What we mean by that, of course, is this thing called energy. And that's hard to touch, right? You can go touch Ruthie's tree, but it's awfully hard to touch nature. Why? Well, because nature is energy. And you can't really touch energy even though you know it exists. Even though, for example, you know beauty exists. There wouldn't be Victoria's Secret models if there wasn't a concept called beauty. And yet you really can't touch beauty. We made the observation that, for example, the exchange of fluids, sex, is a whole lot different from this thing we call love. And by our senior year, we're acutely aware of that. We've watched too many NASCAR train wrecks in relationships over the last 4 years, right? Am I saying that right? Okay? To understand, there is a monumental difference between the exchange of fluids and this thing we call love. Notice this over-related to the five senses. Love, you can't touch love. You can't see love. Love is metaphysical. Now go back to the line, and this is an interesting line by Yeats. Caught, he uses the word of a net, the picture of a net, like what you would catch fish in. Caught in that, watch my whiteboard as I work these lines. Caught in that sensual music, watch my whiteboard, this will make sense. Caught, and then I'm going to have a debate with you. Caught in that sensual music. Oh, watch this, Mr. Lang. You're not paying attention, and I'm helping you write the next paper that you want to work on. Caught in that sensual music, all neglect monuments of unaging intellect. Watch it again. Caught in that sensual music, all neglect monuments of unaging intellect. Let's start in our notes. What's a monument? Go ahead and write down a definition. What's a monument? If, for example, you construct a monument, what is that? What's it for? What is a monument for? To help other people what? Remember. Outstanding. A monument is to help people remember. What is unaging? Does not get old. Does not get old, right? Unaging. Watch the whiteboard again. Young people are so caught or focused on the stuff in the first box. They neglect the monuments of unaging intellect. Things that don't grow old. Now, I don't want to insult Mr. Judice, but it's altogether possible. I think I'm right, maybe wrong. But it's altogether possible that in 200 years, they probably won't be listening to Britney Spears songs anymore. I'm sorry, Mr. Judice, you can argue this on your own time, but my guess is they probably won't be paying much attention to, well, wait a minute. This is an intriguing question, Mr. Brown, and let's jot it down, and we'll ask a 3B question here. And listen to my question carefully so that you can answer appropriately. From your generation, write down one band that you now listen to that you believe they will still be listening to in 200 years. Don't say it. Write it. And about any one that you write down, I want you to really seriously ask. See, because here's the deal. I can tell you that in 200 years, they're still going to be listening to Beatles songs. See, I can say that and I can predict that. I can do even better than that. I can absolutely guarantee in 200 years, they're still going to be playing Beethoven symphonies. They're still going to be playing the music of Mozart. Now, I'm not asking you whether you like that or not. Caught in that sensual music, all neglect, monuments of an aging intellect. The very fact that you say out loud, dude, I don't listen to Beethoven, proves Yeats' point. The fact you don't listen to it doesn't mean it's not a monument of an aging intellect. It just means you are caught in sensual music and you can't hear it. You're caught in your own time. That time that is of monuments that are quickly aging. Jot down, I'll go through a series. Some of you will go, oh, I have not thought about this. Name one band from your... Don't write down Led Zeppelin. That ain't from your generation. Don't write down Jimi Hendrix. That ain't from your generation. I agree with you. Jimi Hendrix's music will still be heard. Bob Marley's music will still be listened to in 200 years. That's not from your time. I'm asking from the moment you were born going forward, write down the music, one band from your time right now that 200 years from now they'll still be listening to. Or you guess that they'll still be listening to. I'll keep going. Well, we watch a lot of movies, right? We watch a lot of movies. Jot down one movie from your time that still in 200 years they'll still be watching. Go ahead and try and jot down one movie you've watched that about you can say legitimately, not in jest, not in joke, but legitimately, you can say, you know what, they'll probably still be watching that film in 200 years. See, it's a fair question to ask. In 200 years, are they still going to be watching Titanic? See, that's a debate. That's a debate. It's the highest grossing film of all time, at least up to this point. Will they still be watching it? Those Batman films that, for example, Christian Bale made that you kind of grew up with, or those Twilight films that now have ended, thankfully, some of us say, will we be watching those films in 200 years? Right? Hello? We can keep going. See, watch how this works. We can keep going. See, some of you are aware, don't mean to insult, but some of you are aware that Scooby-Doo is not from your time. Sorry. Scooby-Doo is from an earlier time. I don't want to offend. Some of you say, no, Scooby-Doo is from my time. It's not. When you were watching Scooby-Doo, you were watching reruns. That's my question now. What TV shows from your time? That is to say, they're on one time a week in the evening because they're being made right now. What TV shows are you familiar with that you think will still be watched in 100 years or 200 years? Right. Now let's finish part one. Let's finish. I'm sorry, I've got to go quickly. You're absolutely right. It would be a fun debate, and I've done this before, where I actually had students write down the material from their own time. What book from that you've read in your generation do you think is still going to be read? Because hello, I'm reading a poem now, almost to the day, 100 years later. Right? He wrote it about 1912. That's 100 years ago, right? Yeah, 1912 is 100 years ago. Are you with me? Right? So the obvious question is, what material are you exposed to now will still be around in 100 years, much less 200 years? See, that's an interesting question. Are you ready for this? Yeats says there are works of art. Now I'll go to my whiteboard. Watch this. There are works of art that gesture towards unaging. We as young people have a tendency to be too consumed with the other box to pay much attention. In other words, remember what Wordsworth said in Tintern Abbey? We spend so much time dizzy that we don't have time for elevated thoughts. It is an intriguing question to ask about what's on your iPod. What on your iPod will still be listened to in 200 years? See, hello. There's always hello. There's always of course going to be some debate about this, which is good. Yeats says the first thing about the country that this old man is leaving is that it's a country of young people, and young people cannot appreciate these monuments of an aging intellect. They're so focused on the present moment. They're so focused on, well, some of us now have to look back at our high school career and say, yeah, that's pretty much what my high school career was. A senior or two has said it this way: I wish I knew now what I didn't know as a freshman. I've learned a few things along the way, and now I try and talk to freshmen and they don't hear it at all. What is an old man? Part 2. I'm going to work. Hello. Don't put your stuff away. I'm going to work right up till the bell rings because I have to. I'm helping you get ready for the exam. Part 2. An aged man, old people, is but a paltry thing. Let's write the word down, paltry, for your notes. What is paltry? Well, if I went out to Ruthie's tree when that last leaf is on there falling in the fall, that brown leaf, I take that leaf, brown, I put it in my hand and I do this. I open my hand. Where's the leaf? Gone. That is paltry. Write it down. That is paltry. Paltry means so old it's decaying. That's the sagging bag. That's the thingy of old people, right? That's the thingy, right? This thingy, right? Okay? That's what we're talking. An aged man is but a paltry thing. And now we're going to go back to a word picture that T.S. Eliot used in Hollow Men. A tattered coat upon a stick. Uh-oh, jot down, what is that? He says old people are like what? They're like scarecrows. I don't know if you've spent any time around really old people. I once had the great honor of being with a woman who was in her late 90s. She was almost 100 years old. And, I mean, I was young at the time, and so I was, like, interested. So I just asked her out loud. You know, I was young and stupid. I said, what's it like to be so old? I didn't realize I was maybe insulting her. And she said, that's really interesting you would ask me that, because she said, not a lot of people ask me that anymore because they're afraid they might insult me. I was like, well, I'm young, and I want to know, what's it like to be 100 years old? And she said, it's really weird, because in my mind, I can still see myself at 20. When I was finishing high school and stuff, that age, in my mind, I can still see myself that way. But my body, it's not that anymore. And she said, when I look at myself in the mirror, I recognize that I'm like way old. But in my mind, I can still remember what it was like to be really, really young. An aged person is but a paltry thing, a tattered coat upon a stick, unless soul, clap its hands and sing, and louder sing for every tatter in its mortal dress. Yeats says there's 2 of you. 2 Mr. Judices, not 1. There's the Mr. Judice who's the body of Mr. Judice. Follow this, watch this. There's the Mr. Judice who's the body of Mr. Judice. His body is going to get old. Soon it's going to be as old as Mr. McGee's and then older. Okay? And as his body decays, becomes paltry, there's a second Mr. Judice, that's his soul. See, watch my whiteboard. See, watch this. There's this thing called the human body, man, woman, right? The body. There's the physical body, right? But there's this thing called soul or spirit, or if you're into science, we call it what? Energy, right? We call it energy, don't we, right? As Mr. Judice, watch this. As Mr. Judice's body gets older, his soul begins to do this. Yay! Why? Jot it down in your notes. Why? Why does Mr. Judice's soul begin to clap and sing and louder sing as his body starts to get older? Why? Well, the word picture that gets used in part 3 is that Mr. Judice is dragging around, his soul is dragging around an old dead thing. Now, you don't realize it as an old dead thing, your body. You do all this work when you look at it in the mirror to make sure you look good. Yeats says, you don't get it. That thing you keep dressing up, it's a corpse. It's like dragging around a corpse. You think, of course, differently, because you think that body's going to last forever. Your soul knows otherwise. Your soul knows otherwise. So as your body begins to age, your soul begins to sing for emancipation, freedom. Yay, I get to get away. Death, then, for your soul is different from death for your body. Death for your soul is like, yay, finally the body's going to die and I get to escape. Remember, Yeats believes in afterlife. And if you believe in afterlife, then you're not so worried about your body getting old and dying, because finally your soul can escape and sail to Byzantium. Nor is there singing schools, but studying monuments of its own magnificence. And therefore I have sailed the seas and come to the holy city of Byzantium. Now in the third part, he's going to speak to the old farts, to the monuments of an aging intellect, to those stained glass windows in the Byzantium churches, sages they're called, standing in God's holy fire as in a gold mosaic of a wall. Come from the holy fire, burn in a gyre, and be the singing masters of my soul. For your notes, it's as simple as this. I want to learn from the old farts one or two things about how to grow old well. I want to learn from old people. I think this is a good way to say it. Listen to what old people have to say. They can teach you something if you can listen. Why? Because, go ahead and look at part 3 real quickly. Notice what he says. Consume my heart away, sick with desire and fastened to a dying animal. Your body is a dying animal. Your soul is fastened to it. And your body doesn't know what it is. And gather me into the artifice of eternity. Why? Part 4. Once out of nature, I shall never take my bodily form from any natural thing. I told you, Yeats believes in reincarnation. He says, when I come back, he says, I don't want to come back as anything natural or living. Really? What's he want to come back as? A form as a Grecian goldsmith would make of hammered gold or gold enameling. What's he say? When I come back, I don't want to come back as anything living. Why not? Everything living dies. Fish, flesh, or fowl come in all summer long. Whatever is begotten, born, it dies. When he comes back, what's he want to come back as? A monument of an aging intellect. Right. He wants to come back as Keats' Grecian urn, that long outlives the artist and even long outlives Keats, right? He wants to come back as a work of art. Final question, 3B, write it down for yourself. If you had to come back after you died, would you want to come back as something living or something non-living? First question. If you wanted to come back as something living, would you come back as something human living or something non-human living? That is to say, if you could come back and be like an animal, what would it be? If you wanted to come back, for example, and be a tree, what tree would it be for you? If you had to come back and be a human, what kind of human would it be for you? But if you chose to not come back as a human, you had to come back as something non-human, what would you want to come back as? Would you want to come back, for example, as a car? Would you want to come back as a motorcycle? Would you want to come back as a work of art? And what kind of work of art would you want to come back as? Be careful while you think about questions like this and drive your car. You don't want to go through the intersection with the red light because you are thinking about this question. What would you want to come back as and why? It's an interesting 3B question. Thank you for your kind attention and welcome to W.B. Yeats.